Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Off Script with Pastor Jared.
And Aaron, the intern.
Back in the lab
Back
again.
at it again, that's right.
Well, we're going to get into a topic today that is quite honestly relevant and in the news, and it's happening right now as we were actually just looking at stock prices for particular companies, taking a dip today. We're going to talk about boycotts from the perspective, hopefully, of a Christian, and it's the rage right now because in case I assume everyone's listening now, but hey, someone might be watching in like 3 years and they're like, what's going on? We're in the throes of the Target question right now, and then we're also in the tail end of the Bud Light controversy.
Right.
So I know neither of us are Bud,
I was going to say Baptists don't really.
Bud drinkers, but but either way, clearly, let's just give that context real quick. A couple, maybe 2 months ago, it feels like now, Bud Light put out a promotional can with Dylan Mulvaney on the can, which they didn't sell it. It was just a marketing
gift, I guess.
Yeah, I think to him. And
not her.
That's right, to him, and it was just sort of on his face on the can and celebrating something. And the photo went out to social media, and it kind of took on a life of its own.
Right.
And I think because the average Bud Light drinker is not a supporter, I think that was a calculated poor choice on their part, just from a business perspective, and spiritual perspective, obviously, is its own discussion. But so we're kind of living through the tail end of that. It looks like Bud Light's actually hurting from all the news that I'm seeing. It looks like that it's actually been successful. And can we say also, I think one reason why people don't do boycotts as much is because there's not a great track record of success.
That's true.
You tend to look at them as like they flame out. People get excited for maybe a couple days, and then you're like, well, I'm not going to stop drinking Bud Light. I'm really not going to stop going to Target. And it kind of flames out, and you feel you vent, you get your anger out, and then you move on. And that's kind of been the history with boycotts of late. I can't speak outside of my lifetime and memory, but usually it's not been very successful. And so I think even before we start, that's been a reason people have been hesitant to even talk about it, because before you even look at from a biblical perspective, you might say they just don't work. So it's kind of pointless to do something that doesn't work. But this is really pressing this week because news with Target has come out that they have been pushing the transgender part specifically. They've for years have had a very strong LGBT front. Have you ever seen one in a store when walking through Target?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
it's all over the place.
I know. I remember one in the Collierville Target. I've seen they had right when you walk through the front door. As soon as you go, past the little cheap items that they sell right when you walk in, the little $1 items, and boom, right there in the transitional space to the clothing, there was a really big display with all sorts of very weird stuff.
No, they
Rainbow
don't hide
to the
it
max.
Anymore.
And anyway, so Target has kind of gone beyond just I expect Walmart to carry Pride things or rainbow things. What pushed Target, I think, beyond was they started selling what was reported as chest binders, which is for females to wear. Even I don't know the age. I don't want to say for sure children or not, but for females to compress their breast to make it feel less of a almost like a man's chest, to kind of remove the femaleness of it. And then there's also discussions recently about what's called like tucking swimwear, which not fun to talk about, but essentially to take the male genitals and make them as less pronounced as possible. And that has been discovered on some of their children's clothing and swimwear to aid if there was like a young boy who wanted to appear female. They have these extra, I don't know how it works, but they have this extra part of the clothing that binds the male genitals to make it flatter. That's all I want to go into, but basically that's happening.
It's terrible.
It is happening. And then the last straw that's happened this week, and I think news dropped today or yesterday that they pulled some items relating to they had hired a designer that had a satanic background.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
To do something with designs of certain graphic T-shirt designs, and I've heard that they've pulled those. And then even news came out yesterday that they were moving in certain southern stores. They were moving the displays, the Pride displays, to the back of the store.
Okay.
So something happened.
Yeah, I didn't hear that part.
So anyway, that's the context of what we're talking about. Right. And we can be somewhat brief on this, but my question is, how should Christians think about boycotts? Should we be generally supportive, generally suspicious? Say that's not our thing? Is there a biblical case for it? So that's what I gave to my dear intern, Aaron, and asked, go give me some thoughts, and we'll rattle it back and forth. So where do you start when you start thinking about this?
So I thought of, and I put down just for reference, 4 different passages. Might not hit all of them, but I wanted to start out in my search of scripture, and unless you found something that I couldn't find anywhere.
I may just contradict everything you said.
There is no direct scripture passage on boycotting. So discernment, regardless of either of our opinions, we can say discernment is needed in the life of the believer. There's no this is what we have to do. Can we agree on that?
It depends on how you define boycott.
Okay.
I think you can say there might be examples of if you feel this is wrong, don't do this.
Right, and that's where I'll be going.
Yeah, but as far as a clear economic,
right,
if the store sells rainbow apparel,
thou shalt not shop there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for that level of clarity, you may not find that.
Okay. So with that, you just referenced the second passage I was going to mention. But the first one was in 1 Corinthians 5. Did you pull up that one?
No, I want to hear it.
Okay, it's cool. So in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul is addressing sin within the church in Corinth. But he applies it in an interesting way. So 1 Corinthians 5, 9 through 11, I have it here, so I'll read it. Paul says, I wrote to you in my letter, so a letter he had previously written to them that we don't have record of. He says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. So he just lays that out. But then he clarifies, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy, the swindlers, the idolaters. Since then, if you did that, you would need to go out of the world. But I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother, if he is guilty of sexual immorality, greed, idolatry, reviler, drunkard, swindler, not even to eat with such a one. So in that passage, I see that Paul is calling the church, and by implication, we can say to our lives, that we are to avoid association with sinful people in the church, but we cannot altogether completely avoid association with sinful people in the world.
Right.
Because if we did that, we'd have to go sit in a little hole somewhere and not go anywhere.
Your great idea of the let's build a commune.
Right, yeah. and hide out there altogether.
Right,
yeah.
Buy some space in Wyoming and build a ranch.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds a little culty.
But that would make the Great Commission impossible.
Right.
It would render it impossible.
So I guess some implications I drew from that on boycotting are that if we were to apply this to businesses, I'm just saying what is required of Christians. If there is a Christian business that openly supports sinfully immoral practices, then we should boycott them.
Okay. I wasn't ready for that. Okay, good.
But if there is a worldly business that supports sinful practices, in reality, at some level, we could apply that to every secular business out there. So I would say we are not required to avoid them like we are required to avoid the believers.
Avoid is key. You know?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good application. Yeah.
So that was the first kind of thought passage.
So basically, if any business does anything that is contrary to our views, we don't have to immediately say we can only buy from Christian businesses. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
So I don't think we're called to boycott the world entirely,
Right.
or even to say, well, this
We need a
person in the
Christian-
world is sinful, so I'm going to avoid them.
Well, that's even good because there are some that say we need a complete parallel Christian economy.
Yeah.
That has our own businesses, our own everything.
Yeah.
And those things aren't bad to have. I would actually like a world where there was more Christian owned things, and
Right.
if there was a Christian Hollywood or whatever,
Right.
Fine, that'd be fine. But I don't think we're required to use that exclusively so that we don't have to
Yeah.
live in the world.
So then the conversation, would stem out of that, at what point, like, is boycotting avoiding them? So therefore, should we not boycott them? Because then we're completely avoiding them. But then you could say, well, we could see them outside of work. We could talk to them outside and still be in contact with them.
But one thing you said, though, is that if a Christian
Right.
business does partake in an open, flagrant sin, we should actually boycott them.
I think so.
On purpose. To punish, and the goal would be to punish them.
Yeah. To judge them as fellow believers. Because
Correct.
Paul even says later in that passage that we're not called to judge the world. God's going to judge the world. And perhaps he even, does that through our proclamation of the gospel.
So if
But we're called
Chick-fil-A
to judge the church.
So if Chick-fil-A, which we know has more Christian values in their company than most any other company we could name, did the Pride sandwich or something,
Oh, goodness.
you would say we need to directly go hard at them and boycott them
I would say that.
because they're closed on Sundays and they espouse Christian principles
Right.
in their upper level management. Okay.
But again, I think discernment would, of course, be needed there. I'm not saying dogmatically you have to do this. That's just an implication I take from the text.
Safe for Hobby Lobby?
Yeah. I mean, any openly Christian, I mean, even when I worked
There's
at
not many,
Chick-fil-A,
but they're
yeah. But even when I worked at Chick-fil-A, like in their mission statement, it talks about glorifying God.
yeah.
So,
All right, I'm interested. Keep going.
you want me to go to my next passage? Cool. And then Romans 14, which you mentioned, Paul is dealing with people in the church who choose not to partake in eating food that is sacrificed beforehand to idols versus those who would say, hey, it's fine, it's clean to us. And he references that. I have a couple of verses in Romans 14. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I just wanted to read that. So Paul says in Romans 14, verse 3, let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. Let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats. Verses 5 and 6, he says, one person esteems a day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike, talking about disagreements. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day, observe it to honor the Lord. The one who eats, eat to honor the Lord, since he gives thanks to God. While the one who abstains, abstain in honor of the Lord and give thanks to God. So even though these two people disagree, he's saying, well, as long as in your own mind you're convinced of this and you're doing it to honor the Lord, then continue in doing what you're doing.
Okay.
Verse 10, he says, why do you pass judgment to your brother? Because in verse 12, he says, each of us will give account of himself to God. Do not pass judgment on one another, but rather decide never to put stumbling blocks in the way of a brother. I am persuaded in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean in itself, but it is unclean for anyone who thinks it is unclean. It is not good to eat meat or drink or wine or anything that causes a brother to stumble. The faith that you have, keep between yourself and God. Blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. But whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith. Whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. So a couple things that he says here.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot. So I just have kind of 4 points that I got from that. Do not despise someone who has a different personal conviction than you, especially on something that Scripture has not directly addressed.
Okay.
Secondly, discern in everything that you do whether or not that thing honors the Lord. And if it honors the Lord, sure, follow it, do that conviction. If it does not honor the Lord, follow that conviction, do not partake in it. because each of us are going to give our own account to God. Thirdly, if you have a brother or sister who has a strong conviction in one way, don't cause them to stumble by directly contradicting them to their face. This doesn't mean on biblical issues. If your brother is living in sin, by all means, please,
they can't say
correct him.
That's my personal conviction that I can live with my girlfriend.
Right. And it's like, no, this is what Scripture says.
Right.
But if it's like, hey, it's my personal conviction that Target has gone too far, so I don't feel like I'm honoring the Lord by spending my money there. But let's say I say, well, I'm not convicted of that. There shouldn't be this broken relationship where we try to outdo and hurt one another because of our convictions, but rather we should honor one another as long as we believe in our own lives that we're honoring the Lord. And then lastly, everything that we do has to proceed from faith.
Okay. Now, for the record, for the context, for people listening, both here in Romans 14 and in 1 Corinthians, either 8 or 10, I get them mixed up. Paul talks about meat sacrifice to idols as the issue that he's helping guide people through, because it was so common in these days. Sacrifices were obviously still common. Not just the Jews, other pagan temples had animal sacrifices.
Right.
And so because of that, you would have near the temples, you would have meat markets, and it would be like overflow. Hey, this didn't make the cut to hit the sacrifice table, but we're selling it on discount. And a lot of families would eat meat that came from pagan temples, and so Christians were trying to figure out, kind of weird. This was either sacrificed or cut from the same animal that was sacrificed. It's just meat. I don't believe in the idol. I don't believe in the temple. But can I get the meat on discount? Basically, is the question. And so Paul, guiding people through that, was saying, essentially in the Corinthians version, he's saying you can, as long as it doesn't bother you deeply. If you understand that those idols are not real, they're not real gods. They're not. As long as it's not a burden to your soul, go ahead. But bear in mind, you have weaker Christian brothers watching you, and they may not understand. They may not be able to comprehend that level of liberty that you have. Yeah,
and even to just dive into that context for a moment, and just imagine if someone in, let's say, we were at Corinth Woods Baptist Church in first century Corinth,
of course,
and someone joins our church who, let's say, earlier before she came to Christ, she was a sex worker in the temple. And she comes to a fellowship lunch with us. She finds out that the food that we're eating was sacrificed in the temple. That might be a serious stumbling block and something that is really personal to her because of her past. But
it's kind of like someone that's been formerly was what we call an alcoholic or something. It's been dealing with, and then some Christians like, hey, as long as you're not drunk, and then they kind of take a little sip. You're like, but that really did a death blow to that person.
Right.
You have to keep those things in mind. But at the same time, you can't. Everyone has to stand for their own account, like you said in the Romans 14. So one person's strong convictions don't necessarily mean that another person must follow. Like if one person comes to this extremely strong view that we must always do this, and it can't become a new rule for Christians.
Yeah. So the way that I implied that principle to boycotting, and I think we can do this. I'm not going to say this is directly in Scripture, but I think we can apply it in some certain ways through the implications of the text. So I said, if you are either slightly or fully convinced that you should boycott a secular company and that doing so would honor God, then you need to boycott them and follow your convictions.
Okay.
If you are not convinced that you should boycott a secular company, but you have a friend with you who is strongly convinced and you know that they're convinced of that, then don't tempt them by, saying, hey man, let's go hang out at Target, you know? And then thirdly, whether boycotting is your thing or not, I think we're each called to seek to honor God with our convictions, whether it's in politics, economics, any area of life, ask yourself, does this honor God? And if it does, you're free to do so. If it doesn't, then you have to answer before God one day. Don't go against your convictions.
All right. I like it. You got one more?
Yeah,
give me your home run.
I have some small
Give me your home run, your biggest one.
Oh, well, that might be my biggest one. Yeah. But just two small quick points. Ephesians 5:11, Paul says, take no part in unfruitful works of darkness. Instead, expose them. So if you are convicted that spending money at a secular business will be participating in their sinful works, then don't do it.
Well, that is a fair question. What are you supporting with your what do people, if I give you $1 and then you go do something bad with that $1, it's mostly on you, but if I knew you were going to do it, it's a little on me too.
You're still participating in some way.
Especially if I knew. If I didn't know, that's one thing. But if I give it to you and you go, that's like there are companies, if you know a company supports Planned Parenthood, for example, you might really want to think about giving them money because you now know what they're doing with your dollars.
And then another quick point, Matthew 22, when the disciples of the Pharisees and the Herodians are asking Jesus about the tax and Caesar and all that stuff. Well, the Roman government at that time was evil. They were anti-Jew, and we know later on they were anti-Christian with Nero and all the further later on emperors. But Jesus still tells the people to pay taxes to the government. So I think implications of that would be that even if your government is evil, you should still pay taxes to them. Don't say like, well, I don't like, the whatever policies they're passing. And, I just don't want to support that gay president. So I'm not going to do my taxes. Like, no, we're still called to give our taxes to the government, but where it breaks down is if they turn to you and they say, hey, you need to be gay or something like that, they try to force you to do something that's against God. And I think there's principles in scripture that at that point we can defy the government. But with your tax paying money, don't think, well, I'm going to boycott this liberal government because I don't want to spend my money on them. So
can I just say that's a very strange situation?
just thinking of an example.
Yeah. All right. So I kind of want you to give me an out the door statement of going back to the yes or no kind of question, or how would you frame the answer? Because what I'm hearing is...
So the answer is, should I boycott fill in the blank? Mm-hmm. If you look at the situation and you say, hey, I feel like this would be honoring to God if I boycotted them, then boycott them.
Okay. So you're open to it.
I'm open to it.
Based on the person.
I don't think there can be a dogmatic yes or no. Maybe in an extreme scenario.
Well, it kind of depends on what the thing you're boycotting is doing, right?
Right.
We're thinking of Target right now. It's in our mind. Target and Bud Light.
So yeah. So Target specifically, if you feel that shopping at Target, whether online or in person, would be supporting their agenda and would be dishonoring to God, then by all means do not go there and shop. Go shop somewhere else. But if it does not dirty your conscience and it doesn't hurt your relationship with God personally, then go on ahead and shop there.
All right. I'll get into my thoughts now. I think when you think of this, there's two levels to it, which you gave. I'm just going to clarify it. First, there's the level of the personal decision, the individual's conscience, which we talked about. So there may be things that come up in life where you just say, that's too far from me. Mm-hmm. I understand if others don't see it that way. I don't want to support that because it bothers me.
Right.
And that's going to be different for every person. There's a scripture. I want to read one, a new passage that I thought was good on the conscience. 1 Timothy 4:1-2 says, now the Spirit expressly says in later times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons through the insincerity of liars whose consciences are seared. So what that tells me is that you can get your conscience to a point where you're unable to discern morality. You transgress your own sense of right and wrong enough times, and it gets dull.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Unable to say yes or no, right or wrong, hot and cold. Everything's just a gray blur, and you don't. And I would say, like, an example of this is you watch enough media, you watch enough commercials with gay men or lesbian women kissing, for example.
Right.
The first time you see that, it's shocking. And everybody can probably remember sometime in the early 2000s or the 90s or something, when the first time you saw that, and it was like, whoa, your head spins. And you're just like, what? I've never seen that. That is disgusting. Like, it just kind of shocks you. Well, what's happening? It's not that anymore, is it? It doesn't matter who you are. There, you may still be, but it loses that shock factor.
Right.
And so we are all, by virtue of the culture we live in, becoming desensitized to certain sins because of where we live and what we see.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a caution. I think it was Martin Luther that said, to go against my conscience is neither safe nor sound.
Right.
There's a quote I remember like that. So you have to be careful not to be the frog in the boiling pot where the temperature rises and you don't realize it, and you boil yourself to death eventually.
100%.
So that's the individual conscience level. And on that level, every man, woman has to look out for themselves. Every father, every parent has to watch out for their kids. You have to guard that. So we've seen examples of this all the time. Like, I remember the Pride Whopper came out a couple years ago, and it's like, well, Clearly, I'm not going to go buy the Pride Whopper.
No.
Can I go get chicken tenders, from Burger King? And so I think that question comes up on a personal level. And you might say, hey, I'll wait till they drop the Pride Whopper, then I'll go back and get my chicken nuggets. But for that month, they need to know they've pushed me too far.
Yeah.
And that goes with everything. You see, like, for me, a big thing is, like a banner on a storefront. It's what you make me do. That's the way I think about this, is what are you making me assent to? If it's somewhere deep in your company or if it's on some sales rack in the corner, to me, that's one thing. A big flag on the front and me having to walk underneath a rainbow to enter the door is another thing. I feel complicit in that. When you're everywhere I look, I'm provoked. I'm like Paul looking around, seeing idols everywhere, and I'm provoked in my spirit. To me, you can lose me that way if you're making me do things that I don't want to be a part of.
Just to clarify, like, I'm not saying, like, to say that it's okay to shop at Target. I'm not saying,
no, you made your point.
Hey, man,
you can't go back now.
No, I'm not saying, like, hey, like, when you go shop at Target, go buy that, tuck away swimsuit. Like, no, please do not buy that. I'm just saying, like, if you need to buy
can I buy bagels?
Yeah, if you need to get bagel from Target, like, that's not.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Just clarifying.
Clearly, the question is, you never buy a Pride item. You never buy those items or support anything that says Pride on it. We're saying your whole point was, can I still get my groceries from there? Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Everyone gets you. Don't fear.
Just clarifying.
But so there's a personal level of that. And then I think the second question is there a time when this goes beyond a personal decision to what we would call an organized boycott? So a boycott, by definition, is when you refuse to use a good or service in order to inflict a punishment upon them. It's to send a message for yourself, but also to them. You want them to know that something's wrong and that you've lost the Christians, for example. You continue to do this, you lose the Christian vote. I think with the Bud Light one, I think that one's probably not primarily a Christian organized boycott. I think that's just a conservative or like it's mostly run just by right-leaning people that say that's too far for me. The Target one, I think, has the potential to be more of a Christian one. But anyway, that's the question with a boycott is, do we want to inflict? And Christians are weird about this because we've kind of lost little bit of our backbone. So even me talking about this, there's some Christians that are twitching right now thinking about it.
Yeah.
But can we inflict a punishment upon others? And maybe you need to use more Christian language. Should a judgment come upon them through us as the agents of God? Should they feel a little something, a little burn for what they've done? And I would even say in that though, like, for example, we talked about one time on a older podcast about the SBC boycott of Disney World. Yeah, back in 97.
Back in 97. And again, I would say there is a time and place where those organized boycotts can be used well. But I would say to be careful in saying that this is a conviction of how we think one should act, not necessarily how one is required to act.
Right.
So if someone from that SBC convention went to Disney World, all the other Christians shouldn't be like, yo, we are like disfellowshipping you. You are a heathen.
You crossed the picket line.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think being careful on that as well.
Right.
Both on the personal level and the organizational level.
Right. But we would say if that person went and waved a flag,
right,
or they wore the red T-shirt and stood at the parade, that's right.
That's different. Yeah. Definitely.
But going and writing "It's a Small World" with your family may not, for them, mean their complicity.
Yeah. Now that song stuck in my head.
That you're welcome. One example that we haven't mentioned that I just want to throw out as a maybe. I don't know that this is a boycott, but I just want to put it out there and see how it hits you. When David and the boys arrive in Babylon, and they say, we're not going to do the food program. We're not going to eat the king's food. And
Daniel.
Did I say David?
Yeah, you did say
Daniel.
David. Yeah,
Daniel,
I had to sit there and think for a minute.
Daniel and the crew, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, all those guys, when they arrive and they're told by the Babylonian Empire what they're going to eat. And this is not an economic thing. I just, is there some principle? All right. And they're told, and they say, no, we're not going to do that. Here's what we're going to do. We'll do our vegetable system with the water and this and that, and we'll compare ourselves to you at the end of 10 days and see who's looking good and who's looking fat, and we'll check out. Then a chapter later, we will not bow to the statue. 2 chapters later, I'm going to pray outside with my windows open.
Right.
You can't tell me not to pray. What is that? Is there? What can we learn from at least that?
Yeah, and I would say at least for 2 of those, it's clear. So I would say for the not bowing to an idol and being willing to pray openly, I think those are setting up priorities in your mind. Who am I going to bow to? You cannot worship God and money. You cannot worship God and fill in the blank. So I'm not going to worship God and nation by bowing to this idol. I'm not going to worship God and my king by saying, well, I'm not going to pray. So I think there's a priority list. Like, if this goes against my relationship with God, then I'm not going to do it. So for those 2, for obviously bowing to an idol is saying there's something that I fear more than God. That's wrong. Not being willing to pray is saying, hey, I'm more afraid of the king than I am my personal relationship with God. That's wrong. But it's hard on the food one, because even studying it with Dr. Miller, there's different views on why they couldn't eat the food. There's some that say that it was against the law that they grew up under. And for that, I would say they are following their convictions to follow God's law, even when they're in a different country. But then there's also some who say that food was sacrificed to idols, and that's why they couldn't eat it. And that would take more discussion because it's in the Old Testament, and that gets confusing too.
Well, I just am throwing that out there as another thing to consider. There should be a time in life when we say
there's definitely a principle there. Right?
Yeah, there's a time to say no, and you've pushed me too far, and I will not.
Right.
I think for most Christians, I will just want to say this and put it out there. I think for most Christians, we have gotten weak, and that line has grown too far. And I think what we need to do more of is set our line in advance and say what it is, and then when it's crossed, we do it, because we are the frog in the pot where we say things like, well, if it ever gets serious, then I'll act up. But then it gets serious and we don't act up, and we move the goalpost a little further, and we say, well, this isn't really the big issue to throw down on. It's like people said that in 2015 when Obergefell went through with the Supreme Court case, and gay marriage was essentially legalized.
And now look at where we're at.
And it's like, well, this is bad, but it's not the big one. We need to hang on for the big one. It's like, well, what's the big one?
Right.
Name the big one. And then when the big one happens, we'll know it's the big one. But you can't keep saying it, and we keep going past the line over and over again.
That's good.
So we need to name our stance in advance of what's too far. That way we know when it happened, it happened. My guess is you go back 30 years and you tell Christians, hey, there's a store that you're all going to shop at, and it's going to sell products that bind girls' breasts and take boys' penises and wrap them up under their body and block them and aid them in a mental delusion that they are another gender, and they're going to have LGBT pride memorabilia at the front register when you walk in, and you're going to have to walk right by it, and you're going to see it, and it's going to be and they're going to hire a Satanist illustrator to create the T-shirt designs. You'd say, well, you going to shop at that store?
Does sound pretty bad, doesn't it?
I think Christians 30 years ago are going to say, I'm not shopping there. But because we've lived through it, and I'm adding myself to this, look, I'm no better than anybody listening. I shop. I still go to Target, right? Like, so I think through this as myself, and I think, am I weak? Have I lost something? Is something broken in my conscience and my discernment to be more upset than I am? And that's what I struggle through with this, is if you describe that scenario to any Christian adult 30 years ago, I think they're shocked, and they think, no way would we do that.
That seared conscience passage was a good point. In even with things other than boycotting a store, like, what are you feeding your mind? What are you feeding your eyes, your ears? Like, what are you doing from day to day that 30 years ago they would have been like, what on earth?
Right. So anyway, here's how I want to close. I have 3 questions that I think through. These are just Jared questions. Okay. 3 Jared questions that I want to close with. Number 1, does this product or service make me feel complicit or approving? All right. Does going here, using this product, make me feel like I am saying yes to this? And there's different ways that can happen. Like, to me, walking under a rainbow sign, it makes me feel yes.
Yeah.
Biting into a Pride Whopper would make me feel yes, but going through the drive-thru and getting chicken nuggets maybe would make me feel no. I don't know. You know, sometimes in the moment you have to almost like pray, God, what is this? Right. And discern while it's happening.
Seek to honor God.
I got bothered when I went through. There was a restaurant called Mod Pizza. It's a Pyro's like place, and I would always get this little chocolate cake at the end. 'Cause, I got problems, so I would always get the little like chocolate cream filled cake at the end, and they started Pride Month selling a rainbow sprinkle cake. You didn't have to. You could get the chocolate one or the other one. And to me, it bothered me so bad. I said, I can't.
You skipped the chocolate for that day? Man.
I skipped the chocolate and the rainbow. And,
wow.
If I remember right, I think we didn't come back until they removed that item. Okay. But I definitely didn't eat the rainbow cake.
Yeah.
Like, that's clearly the line. The question would be, do I not come back until they don't sell this anymore? And I think that's the personal decision level.
Yeah.
But
personal
anyway,
conviction.
Does doing this make me approve it?
Right.
And that's going to be a gray line that you have to answer yes or no. Secondly, is the level of their sin so egregious that the most loving thing I can do for them is to punish them? That's a hard question. Sometimes somebody's so far and they're running so headlong into sin, the best thing I can do is to make them come to the realization of how far they're gone. And with money talks. And the only way to do that sometimes is to say, I cannot enable you anymore. Yeah. It's like giving money to someone has a drug addiction. Sometimes the best thing you can do for them is stop giving them money so that they can go spend money on drugs. You got to just say, sorry, the most loving thing is for me to let you bottom out. And then maybe you'll realize where you've come.
Yeah.
I think that's true for a person. That's true for a company. Third, are they feeding lies to an audience of innocent children, and are children being harmed? So here's where I go on this. I agree with all the points you made when you started. Those are great points for adults to think through. Yeah. Because we can have rational discussions about our conscience being affected or not. An adult can understand the meat sacrifice to idols argument and say, well, I know they're not really a real God. I know Zeus isn't real, and so it's just a steak. Christians can have that. Christians can have that discussion because we have faculties that can handle that. Children cannot handle that discussion. They can't determine, abstract principles. So when you bring your child past that pride display, they can't separate out as easily. God has spoken. This is not for us. They just see it and they're just affected by it. So I think if a company harms children or makes it part of their mission to turn children toward delusion, I think to me that's a hard cross boundary. Yeah. Because those kids cannot advocate for themselves. And those adults, if they have parents that don't care about them, then the parents are going to subject the children to evil things.
That's right.
And the children, it's our job to speak up for the kids of those parents that aren't going to be biblical in their life. So I have a responsibility, I feel, to children that aren't even mine, and to take down someone who would seek to harm children.
That's a good point.
It's the same thing we do with Planned Parenthood and abortion. But if you harm them while they're living and you feed them lies while they're living, I think we still have a stake, the same way we have a stake before they're born. So my final thought that I want to give is I think we need to consider that we don't need to be completely consistent. And what I want to say with that is sometimes Christians worry more about being consistent than we do about affecting change. So we have bought into this idea that, well, if I'm going to boycott Target or if I'm going to boycott Bud Light, I then need to boycott every other company that does similar things because we so deeply want to be consistent. My encouragement is it's better to win one than to be completely consistent. So you cannot, if you boycotted any company that did Pride Month, for example, you would have to remove yourself from the American economy for a month. That's not possible on some level. So what you can do is punch at one, and you can win one. So we have to determine what are the most effective ones. And if it means you just have to pick a loser, hey, Target's going to take an L, and we're going to teach Target a lesson. I can't do that to Walmart. I can't do that to, Kroger. I can't go down the list and do that. But the one that went the farthest, the one that did the children thing, they can pay. So if we can do that, I think it's more important to choose one than to say, well, unless I can be completely perfectly consistent and get this right and have all my T's crossed and I's dotted, that's not possible. You got to just pick a loser and go at them. So anyway, that's just a side encouragement for me. So obviously I think there's a time and a place. I think you said there's a time and a place for a boycott. My remaining question that I don't have answered and I don't think we can answer in this podcast is the most effective organizational method. How do we come together? What Christian leadership structure raises the flag and says, it's Target now, charge, or Bud Light. I mean, Matt Walsh, who's the guy who he seems like he's been the Bud Light guy, but like what structure do we use to say, hey, we're all going to do this one? I don't think we have that. Maybe we don't need that. Maybe that's bad to have. I don't know. That's the part that to me is left unanswered and I need to think more about. But I do think there's a time and a place that people who cross an egregious boundary need to be reminded Christians will not go with you down that road.
Yeah.
Good?
Good.
Okay. Hopefully this has been helpful for you guys, ladies and gentlemen. And by all means, come visit us on a Sunday at 10:30 at Kirby Woods. We would love to see you. Come shake my hand. Aaron, the Intern merch is going to be coming out soon. No, just kidding. But again, thank you guys for being a part of our podcast. Do subscribe to it, follow it, share it with a friend. Give us a kind 5-star rating. We would greatly appreciate it. Have a great week. God bless.